Welcome, dear friends. I'm so glad you can join us on Mission Evolution, where we bring the latest knowledge from today's leading experts to support your evolutionary process. I'm your host, Gwilda Wiyaka. This hour will explore evolving our approach to climate change. The evidence is becoming overwhelming. Just recently in the U.S., there were at least 30 tornadoes across 6 states. We've had unprecedented droughts, wildfire fires, flooding, hurricanes, and the list goes on. Even the most skeptical among us are starting to recognize we are indeed experiencing climate change. But what to do about it? With us this hour to delve into this very challenging topic is Stan COX. Stan is a research scholar in Ecosphere Studies at the Land Institute in Salina, Kansas. He's the author of 6 books, his latest, The Path to a Livable Future, Forging New Politics to Fight Climate Change, Racism, and the Next Pandemic. His writing has appeared in the New York Times, the Washington Post, Los Angeles Times, the New Republic, and more. You can find out more about Stan at www.citylights.com. Stan, thanks for joining us on Mission Evolution.
Great to be with you, Gwilda.
It's wonderful that we had this time to talk together. It's a very important topic, to say the least. So the first question I'd like to ask you is, what is your educational background?
Well, I have a PhD in plant breeding and cytogenetics from Iowa State University, which is the area in which I've worked for my career in plant science and genetics.
So how did you go from there to being interested in the climate change?
Well, in 2000, I had been working for the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and I moved out to Kansas to work for the Land Institute on developing crops for more ecologically sound agriculture. And the Land Institute has a much broader vision than, say, the Department of Agriculture has, and that involves keeping the earth livable and transforming the way we not only grow food but do everything. And in the 20 years I've been there, it's become more and more clear that if we don't get a hold of our greenhouse emissions and turn the climate emergency around, then everything else we do is going to be in vain. That this is a calamity that we're heading straight for, and we have to take action soon.
We have been looking at this and, to varying degrees for a lot of years, and people haven't taken it very seriously, it seems like. What prompted you to believe, and I assume you believe, that we are indeed in a climate crisis?
You can read any of the reports that have been coming out in the past few years from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is the collection of more than 1,000 scientists around the world under a UN umbrella who have been, for the past 30 years, have been issuing reports on how fast warming is happening, how much of it we can attribute to human causes, et cetera. And they tend to be a little bit restrained in the alarm they might feel, because their reports have to be agreed to by all the world's governments and so forth. But in 2018, they released a report that was a sharp break from the others and said that the changes in the atmosphere and the oceans are happening much faster than even they had predicted, and they really raised the alarm about what's going to happen if the amount of warming that we've had since the start of the Industrial Revolution, if that warming gets up to 1.5 degrees Celsius and exceeds that, they described a lot of global catastrophe that's going to happen. And so that was 2018. And then last year, another UN report, the UN Emissions Gap Report, said that to avoid all of these terrible consequences, that we are going to have to reduce greenhouse emissions starting this year. And of course, we haven't started, but if we started this year, we would have to reduce them by 8 to 10% every year for the next decade if we're going to have a chance to stop this runaway train. Unfortunately, we're not doing that.
So, Stan, what are the other things that are contributing to global warming? I mean, we have cyclic weather changes that span millennia. What's going on there that could also be contributing?
Well, the other things, like cyclic or kind of random changes in the weather are a long time. They're always there and are it's predictable what they will be, as in your local weather forecast, but only for a certain time, and then it's what's called stochastic changes. Whereas what we're seeing with the very steady rise in temperature, it's almost the global average temperature rising in an almost straight line ever since they started measuring it in the mid 20th century, is something that is it can only be a result of the increasing concentration of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases over that same period. It's very much highly correlated with that.
So are you saying that they factored in the natural rhythms? And some of them are very overlording and over a long period of time. I don't know if we even know what they are, but we had ice ages and this and that. And, there's rumor that at one point Egypt was green and now it's desert. So we've experienced this historically before we had the greenhouse gas issue. Have they been able to factor that in so they know how much impact we're actually having?
Well, what they're saying now, I mean, it's true that we've had periods when ice age, during the time of human civilization, we've had the little ice ages of the 19th century and then a few centuries before that. We had the 1930s when it got a little bit warmer than it had been before that. But this is of a whole different scale. Some of these reports coming out are saying that if this steady rise of temperature at the rate it's rising now, if that continues for another decade or two, that we'll be experiencing temperatures that have not, in much of the world, temperatures that have not been experienced by humans for the past 6,000 years. That whole areas of the earth are going to become uninhabitable. And so that's what is really raising the alarm.
And this is a worldwide alarm at this point.
That's right. That's right. And the rises in sea level are certainly one of the biggest concerns, and they have been, and they're measuring the rise coming up, and we're seeing in real time the loss of glaciers, and the fact that there was no snow cover in the Sierra Nevada, and a lot of these unprecedented things. And it was for, when we had Hurricane Katrina and then Sandy, there were debates then. The scientists were saying, well, you can't attribute any one single disaster to human-induced global warming, that it raises the probability of having these disastrous hurricanes.
We're going to have to talk more about probability on the other side of a commercial break.
Yeah.
Stan and I will return shortly, so don't go away. This is Mission Evolution. For more information or to listen to past archived episodes, visit www.missionevolution.org. Hello again. This is Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org. We're dedicated to unification and evolution of consciousness. With us this hour discussing the climate crisis is Stan COX. You can find out more about Stan at www.citylights.com. Stan, we were just getting into establishing the best we can how much of global warming has to do with natural cycles and how much has to do with humans being on the planet with the greenhouse gases. And I think we've pretty well established, at least from your studies and from what the world governments are saying, is that we're kind of in a world of hurt here. How long did you say we have to turn this around before you can't?
According to the UN's emissions gap report, we need to drive we need to reduce the greenhouse emissions that humanity is putting into the atmosphere at a very fast rate, like 8% per year for the next 10 years, to get it down to the emissions down to a point at which we can then continue driving them down to zero. But if we put it off longer and say, okay, we'll just reduce them faster in the 2030s or 2040s, it's going to be too late by then.
So what I brought up at the beginning, all these violent weather patterns we've been experiencing, how much of them are due to the rising temperature and the climate change?
The way the people who work in this area, climate scientists, they, for a couple of decades, kind of hedging and saying, well, you can't attribute any individual catastrophic storm or that sort of thing to human-induced global warming. And instead, what it does, the warmer atmosphere, the warmer it gets, the more it increases the probability of having conditions that will produce those storms. And now they're saying, okay, we know that this increased probability these kind of storms is being borne out in what we're seeing in the on your daily weather forecast or weather report. That system of that front that brought that whole complex of tornadoes through the center of the country recently is a good example. Scientists have been saying for a while that the warmer atmosphere will create the kind of weather fronts that are more likely to produce killer tornadoes. And we saw the heat building up for the week before that front came through in the center of the country and down toward the east. And sure enough, when that front did come through, it was even more devastating than had been predicted.
Now, this last one, you're talking about the one, of course, in the U.S. In my lifetime, and we won't talk how long that is, I've not seen anything like that. Have you?
No, it was crazy having that single tornado or cluster of tornadoes stay on the ground for 250 miles. I haven't seen any of the experts cite a previous example of that.
So the warmer it is, the more excited the air is, and the more volatile the weather. Is that what we're seeing there?
That's right. High temperature means there's more energy in the atmosphere, and warmer weather can hold more moisture in the air, but eventually that moisture's got to come out and we've seen in the past few years in Europe and the U.S. and Asia, the kind of catastrophic flooding that we get from that.
So, what do you consider to be the major contributor to the greenhouse gas situation? Where do we start?
About 3/4 of the greenhouse emissions that are currently going into the atmosphere each year, about 3/4 is from fossil fuels, either the carbon dioxide that is released when you burn oil, gas, or coal, or the leakage of methane, which is the primary component of natural gas, that leaking into the atmosphere.
How does that leak? Where are those leaks at?
That's in, excuse me, during the extraction or the movement through pipelines of the natural gas, and then in its use, because anywhere there's potential for contact with the atmosphere, there's going to be leakage. Every time you turn on the gas stove and are lighting it before it catches on, that natural gas is going into the air. And so all of those sources of greenhouse gases from fossil fuels are about 3/4 of the total. So that is the central thing that has to be done, is to get fossil fuels out of the economy and to keep them in the ground.
So the bottom line is, though, that we need to stay warm. We need to get from point A to point B, because our cars also are emitting fossil fuels, right?
Yes, that's right.
Okay, and so we have very little time to change our entire foundation of how we survive, is what you're telling me.
That's one of the big problems, that we have a lot of stuff that's locked in. We have an insane transportation system in which each individual has to have this couple of ton thing burning fossil fuels to move them around. And we're producing food and like it's an industry, and requiring all kinds of energy that is coming from fossil fuels. And so if we're going to get fossil fuels out of our lives, it's going to mean, first of all, using more electricity and less burning of fossil fuels, and then have that electricity supplied from renewable sources. But it's also going to mean finding ways to live with less industrial energy, meaning we've got to have much better insulation of buildings. We've got to be using heat pumps instead of gas-fired furnaces, and we simply just have to not have as much private transportation, and simply live lives in which we require less energy to go about our lives.
So there's been a fair amount of talk about moving towards local. In other words, bringing back the home garden, shopping locally from garden fairs, and that was going to require less shipping. Is that going to make any difference whatsoever?
That's certainly something that needs to be done, and to not be flying lettuce around the country and so forth. But out of the total amount of energy input that goes into producing and processing food, the transportation of food from where it's produced, where it's processed, to where it's eventually consumed is a very small percentage of the total energy, because we have the greatest quantities of energy going into the increasingly powerful machinery that is planting and managing and fertilizing and harvesting crops, and then the second biggest source of energy consumption is producing nitrogen fertilizer, which is done with natural gas at very high temperature, and requires a huge amount of fossil energy.
Well, we're going to have to pause for another break and pick up on this on the other side. Stan and I will return to our discussion shortly, so you guys stay right there. This is Mission Evolution. For more information or to listen to past archived episodes, visit www.missionevolution.org. Welcome back. This is Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org. Our guest this hour is Stan COX. We're speaking about evolving our approach to climate change. You can find out more about Stan at www.citylights.com. Stan, we were talking about what we can do and where the emissions and this and that are coming from that are creating our portion of the global warming situation. And as you're talking about, we're talking about what kind of a lifestyle change is going to be required of each individual, particularly when it comes to our beloved cars. Isn't there going to be quite a bit of pushback from people that just soon not believe in this because they don't want to be deprived?
That's certainly the case. We have, and all of us who are alive today have experienced a world that is wholly a product of the what's called the fossil fuel bonanza, and nothing we see around us or experience today would look anything like this without that having had this almost limitless supply of energy. And so our society is built for that, but we're going to have to go almost cold turkey pretty soon. And so if we do what I and others have been advocating, and if, say, in the United States, we put a firm cap on the quantities of oil, gas, and coal that can come out of the ground and into the economy each year, and then ratchet that cap down year by year on a rapid schedule, such as the UN's 8% a year. That is really the only way at this point where we can get fossil fuels suppressed in time. Now, as you say, that prospect probably frightens a lot of people. It will mean living a very different life, and so there will be a lot of economic and social adjustments and supports and more equitable economy, and a lot of changes that are going to be required to, if we actually do what's needed, it'll be required to ensure sufficiency for everybody for the essentials of life, and to ensure fairness so that we don't have people suffering, as many people even today, suffering scarcity, while other people are living profligate, wasteful, material lives.
But if that sounds like it would require quite a bit of government intervention. And even the government intervention that has been necessary during this pandemic has not been well met. How do you see this being received at all?
Yes, I think we have certainly seen that when the nation is faced with existential threat like the pandemic, that there is a lot of denial around the country, and people just not wanting to face facts, even when they see people getting sick and dying around them. And so here we have a much slower moving problem. We perceive it as slow moving. The increase in climate disruption, and so it's not going to be possible at this point, I'm afraid, to convince 100% of people to do it, and it's going to be very difficult through democratic means. Even a majority of people enthusiastically supporting this, but we have to be honest and say, look, this isn't something that can be fixed and reversed through non-disruptive means. That we can't, business as usual, it can't work anymore, and so we have to face the fact, if we're not willing to cut back fossil fuels this much, then we have to, here's what we have to expect. And and to say that it's not as bad as it seems to live on less energy, and we can actually create a better world, because if you look at some of the terrible stuff that's we've been able to do through the 20th and 21st century, that humanity has used this potent energy for. We can take that the power for evil away by reducing the quantity of fossil fuel, and then the quantities that we do have to use them to meet everyone's needs.
Well, the status quo, there's big companies, a lot of money out there that are thriving as a result of it. How are we going to work our way around that when there's lobbying and this and that, where the money talks?
That's why in my recent book that came out last month, one of the key things that I'm advocating in there, and this is based on research by others, is that the fossil fuel companies are going to have to be nationalized, because they clearly, as you say, they're not going to be interested in following a new business plan in which they put themselves out of business in 15 years or whatever. Nationalization sounds like a scary thing, but most of the, say, oil industries around the world are publicly owned, they're nationalized. The United States, in every war since the mid-20th century, the United States government has had to nationalize various industries that, in order to make sure that what was needed got manufactured. We closed down and the government nationalized something like 1,000 savings and loans during the scandals of the 1980s. So and it wouldn't cost as much as you think to do it either.
So you see it as doable?
Yes, based on what these experts have said, it is doable, and it needs to be part of what's being referred to as a just transition, meaning people who work in the fossil fuel industries and related industries. We have to have an economic plan for those people and communities that are dependent on fossil fuels for livelihoods and income. And
it's surprising how many of those there are.
Right, and there, but at the same time, we're going to be needing to accelerate the development of other industries, and especially renewable energy and energy efficiency, retrofitting buildings, better insulation. There's a huge amount of trillions of dollars that need to be spent on that, and that's going to be, as we've heard a lot about in the past couple of years, that's going to generate huge numbers of jobs.
I really have faith in humanity's ability to adapt and be innovative. Do you think that's going to be enough to pull us through?
Yeah, we pretty much have to have faith in that, because that's going to be the only way we're going to avoid the worst. And I think it's going to have to be a matter of letting go of the old world, which means both the bad and the good aspects of having this high energy world, and to put our minds to making the new world that we're going to be going into as humane and as ecologically sound as we can.
We're about out of time in this segment, but one of the things that I personally have experienced about cutting back, cutting down, going for alternative things is it actually, once you get through the transition, can take a lot of stress. We live high-powered lives, just like our high-powered engines. And I think it's not the environment's the only one that's suffering, that slowing down wouldn't be a bad thing. Have you considered that?
Right. I think that if we do manage to build this better future, I predict that there will be nobody reminiscing about how they miss
The rat race.
eight lanes of traffic and taking an hour to get to work.
We have to take an hour, not an hour, but a short break here. Stan and I will be back shortly to continue our discussion. Don't go away. This is Mission Evolution. For more information or to listen to past archived episodes, visit www.missionevolution.org. Welcome back. This is Mission Evolution, bringing gifted people of service to the world. This hour, we're sharing thoughts with Stan COX. You can find out more about Stan at www.citylights.com. Stan, we were just about to discuss the pros and cons, and probably we've heard about a lot of the cons, but there's going to be a lot of pros in switching over and not being so dependent upon fossil fuels and finding alternatives. It really can be pretty exciting in my way of thinking. So what do you see as the advantages of, outside of just stopping this heck-bound train, what do you see as the advantages of switching over from fossil fuel into more innovative, renewable resources?
In doing that, in getting fossil fuels out of our lives, one of the things that we'll be getting out of our lives is a lot of air pollution, for example, which is concentrated and unfortunately in generally those kind of industries and power plants and so forth are in lower income areas with communities of color who did not have the political power to say not in my backyard. And so there's been an environmental justice movement for a long time wanting to see that dirty industries are not plunked down in places where they're going to make whole populations unhealthy and sick. There will be environmental costs to wind and solar energy, et cetera, but we won't be dealing with that or dealing with the Deepwater Horizon oil leak or the recent one in California. But we also will, things will be much quieter in urban areas because cities are built right now for automobiles and not for people. And it'll be much easier to get across the street. And there are just a lot of things that are going to be that we will be surprised, I think, at how many things could be better.
Well, one of the things that was noted during this pandemic, it's been a mixed blessing in certain ways, is that that once everybody was confronted with the fact that we just can't do business as usual as a result of the pandemic, people have finally started to adjust. Well, we have slower shipping times, and we have to be careful how many people we have in one place at one time, and all the adjustments that we've had to make to try to get the pandemic under control that have actually slowed things down to our benefit so that we don't have the pressure. If we can't do it, we can't do it. Versus there was no limit before. And so we were pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed to produce more, be more, do more. That's when you have to back off, isn't it?
Right. You mean that the pushing and pushing to do more is going to have to back off?
Yes, the individual can't keep up with it anyway. I think we're suffering as badly as the environment, whether we know it or not.
So, in early 2020, I was working on a previous book, and I was talking about how we needed to have movements, kind of consumption strikes. And one of the things I was saying is a broad boycott of air travel. And then
There we are.
And I laughed at the time and said, yeah, like that's going to really happen. And then a few weeks later, 95% of air travel was not happening, and the world didn't come to an end.
It's amazing how the things that we've taken for granted actually are pretty damaging to us and to the environment that we would be better off without. I just hope, and I'm hoping that your book and people out there getting the real facts out will motivate us enough that we can take that giant step. What can each individual do, Stan, starting right now? So say people are listening to this show, watching this show, and they go, yeah, but what can I do? What can they do?
I think the number one thing is to see where we can join in with collective efforts to get climate to near the top of our issues and to keep it there. And there have been, so far in recent years, there have been groups, the Sunrise Movement, Extinction Rebellion, the school climate strikes. And then we can look at the environmental justice movement and look around and find those organizations, and if there's a local chapter, then join it. If there isn't, then start one, or whatever groups you are a part of, help direct their attention toward this. And because we've got to get it to the red alert list.
So you're saying that we need to become more involved in social movement as an individual and as groups for this to change.
Right. If it were 1990, I think we could talk more about individual changes, and we still all need to be doing those things for a lot of reasons. But
so let's back up a little bit. What are those things that we can do as individuals outside of rallying those around us?
Drive less and fly less, and some of the other things that are always come to the top of the list are consuming fewer animal products. Doesn't mean necessarily going vegetarian, but especially feedlot raised cattle and so forth are a huge producer of greenhouse emissions, and then buy less. And we saw during the first year of the pandemic anyway, people buying a lot less stuff and doing a lot less of these other things, and emissions went down pretty dramatically. and then they came right back up when we increased consumption again.
Yes, it was amazing. What was that mountain range that showed up for the first time in generations? Just from what was it, 1 week of people not being there, and animals that showed up on the seashores. And it's like nature will renew itself quite quickly if we can take the right steps. Is that what you guys are observing there in your studies?
Right, but we don't allow anybody to talk about saving the earth, or we get kind of agitated when we hear about how we've got to save the earth. The earth is going to be fine. It's our civilization that needs to be saved, and that can only be done by healing some of the insults, the physical insults that we've inflicted on the earth.
Absolutely. Stan, at this point, I have to ask you, what is your mission?
My mission here recently is to say, okay, this business of ending the extraction and burning of fossil fuels, that it's going to be something that we may not be able to accomplish. There may be too much resistance to it, but we have to keep it out there as a goal that we need to reach, because if we settle for half measures, then it's going to be even worse. Every tenth of a degree of warming that we prevent will make life more tolerable for the next generations who are coming along.
Well, the next generations are the ones that really are going to suffer if we don't do something. So if you have children, if you have grandchildren, maybe it's enough motivator to think of them, yes?
That's exactly right.
Well, Stan, we're just about out of time, and I can't thank you enough for coming on this show. If everybody takes the first step and moves towards making drastic change in their lives, can't they serve as an example for those around them?
Yeah, that's just probably the best outcome from making changes in our own lives, is that it sets an example, and it gives us standing to speak out on these things.
Well, unfortunately, we are out of time. Stan, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you, Gwilda.
Our guest this hour has been Stan COX, a research scholar in Ecosphere Studies and the author of 6 books, his latest, The Path to a Livable Future. You can find out more about Stan at www.citylights.com. This has been Mission Evolution with Gwilda Wiyaka. For more information or to listen to past archived episodes, visit our website, www.missionevolution.org. Be sure to join us next time as this mission continues, bringing information, resources, and support to our evolving world.